Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema. Exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. If you had 30 seconds in an elevator with someone, and you wanted to get across to them what Thelema is all about, or describe to them the Book of the Law, what might you say? Crowley came perhaps as close as he was capable of coming to an elevator pitch with his brief introduction to the Book of the Law. As we kick off a new season of Deep Dips, Michael and I begin by exploring Crowley's introduction to Thelema's most important text. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, live under will.
Welcome back!
Hey, welcome to the second season of your show.
It's our show. Well, the Deep Dips is officially our show. It's our territory at the very least.
How are you?
You speak as if we haven't been sitting together in the room for...
Yeah, am I allowed to ask that on mic?
No, absolutely. The people, it's like we're here together.
People need to know.
Yeah, we're in your living room, people. Or person. Maybe I should just address in the singular, because it's just you listening to this on your headphones.
Yeah. In the whole world. Just one guy who we've never met.
Oh, we gotta be careful there, because in this day and age, actually in any day and age, it's easy for people to go completely nuts, and gaslighting people is probably not really conducive to...
Oh, I was just thinking more... practically speaking, about the reach of a program like this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't...
I'm just thinking about inadvertently...
I wasn't trying to convince people we were imaginary. But, if that's what they get out of it, I don't think that's my fault.
Well, yeah, I guess we should... introduce today's discussion. We are back with a season 2 of our Deep Dips, as well as everything else here at the Darkly Splendid Abodes. And today we're going to take a look at something pretty fundamental, I guess. It's the introduction to the Book of the Law. Now, this isn't necessarily part and parcel of the Book of the Law or anything like that, but it is insofar as it's, anytime you buy one of those little red copies of the Book of the Law with the gold writing on it, it comes with that. So it's the introduction that Crowley gives to the Book of the Law. It
seemed like for a long time you couldn't get copies of the holy books, and now there's collected editions of the holy books circulating again, which is nice, like off-label clandestine copies. I think Conjoined Creation has one. There's a nice paperback edition called In Nomen Babylon, which I believe also includes the Vision and the Voice. The guy I've mentioned before, whose name may or may not be Auntie Balk, has an edition of the Holy Books of Thelema in red ink, because there's that thing where you should print the text in black and red ink on fine paper, whatever.
Yeah.
And so he's got one that has some of the text highlighted in red ink.
Just the stuff that Jesus said.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And so I was just swept away with enjoying this. And then I saw somebody post on the internet that they are not publishing the preface to the Book of the Law anymore, and that it's a shame many people haven't read it. And I thought, is that right? And presumably, so if you've just been if you have a collected version of the holy books, then it's not in there. And if you look on the internet to try to download a PDF, then it's not in there. So unless you have the cute little red, I think of it as the altar copy of the Book of the Law, you don't have this text. And so I thought it might be kind of worth looking at.
Yeah, what's the context for this? Do you know when he wrote this? I assume it would have been around the early 20s, the Cefalù period, or something like that.
I have no idea. My context for this and my booby trap question that I was going to ask you to begin this is, what do you say? Like, first of all, when was the last time you had to explain Thelema to someone who'd never heard of it before?
Oh, it's funny because this comes up. I think it's probably come up a couple of times, over the past few months or whatever, when I find myself in a position to have to do that, and I evade it. Which is not good, I guess, because the law is to give, but it's one of those things where I'm a little bit evasive, at least, and I find like trying to go through the elevator pitch just so tedious. I
had to do some teaching a couple of months ago to some people who were like interested in Thelema, but didn't seem to know very much. And so I went on for a long time about like the Holy Guardian Angel and the Crossing of the Abyss, like those two AA crises. Mm-hmm. And it really seemed like I was, maybe I got to be careful how I parse this, because like maybe someone will hear this, but I was like surprised, I guess is how I should say it, that they didn't, that it seemed like they didn't know what I was talking about. And so I finished by saying like I would mark this stuff because this just is what Thelema is. It's the Holy Guardian Angel and the Crossing of the Abyss. And there's more than one way to define it. But then also I was traveling for lodge, and my spouse told my parents that I was going to be out of the country, because I guess it's nice to tell your parents when you're leaving the country. And they said, "Oh, really? What's in, city X? What the hell are you doing going there?" And I said, "I guess it's for cult." And then I said it was masonry adjacent, and they didn't know what that meant either. So this is one. Anyway, you asked me the context for this. I don't know what year it was written. Presumably, it went out with a very early edition of the Book of the Law, but I'm actually not sure about that either, because I think the text of the Book of the Law might have been first published in the Equinox somewhere, and I don't think this was appended to that. But spiritually, the context for this is, what is the first thing you say to someone who's never heard of Thelema before?
This is about as good as it gets, really. I mean, this is what he's going for, and it has the flavor of Crowley writing in the 20s or 30s, in my opinion, just in my associations, because he's speaking, he's basically getting to the point of what the philosophy of the book is. And it's very lucid, and it's very concise, which is nice because Crowley's not usually concise per se. And it's in 5 parts.
Yeah, we got sort of 5 short essays. Mm-hmm. And I think in 2 hours we can probably deal with them all. Mm-hmm. Some of them need less dealing with than others. And if we're using our rule of like sticking to the text, sometimes there just isn't that much to dig into. Mm-hmm. This first essay on the book sort of says this book was dictated in Cairo between noon and 1 p.m. on 3 successive days, April 8th, 9th, and 10th in the year 1904. The author called himself Iowas and claimed to be the minister of Hurpakrat, that is, a messenger from the forces ruling the earth at present, as will be explained later on. Setting this up as a received teaching, not the work of the human author, but the work of a spiritual being, a messenger from the forces ruling the earth at present, cryptically and tantalizingly. Mm-hmm. And it says that he showed his knowledge chiefly by the use of cipher or cryptogram in certain passages to set forth recondite facts, including some events which had yet to take place, such that no human being could possibly be aware of them. Thus, the proof of his claim existed in the manuscript itself, and is independent of any human witness. And so this, of course, is very tantalizing. And I think the reason it doesn't dig more deeply into this here, is that the idea is that this is a setup for the Book of the Law, so you're supposed to then be hungry to want to read it and try to do some work on these ciphers for yourself. All he says is, this is a matter best studied under the master Therion, whose years of arduous research have led him to enlightenment. And it promises that more will be explained in an upcoming paper called The Equinox of the Gods. And so this could be a thing that we talk about later if we find some readings that talk about the proofs of the Book of the Law and the Equinox of the Gods. But I don't know. It seems like the import of this is like, if you have a text that claims to be of spiritual origin, how do you verify it? Well, one way might be, are there things in there that the author himself doesn't know or didn't know he knew, so that the author can be in this case the scribe can be surprised by their own work, because the real author, the spiritual author, has given them information in such a cryptic way that they don't realize until later on what the book is about. And also, if you can sort of reliably predict one or two future events, then that also shows a supernatural origin for the book. What do you think?
Yeah, each of these little essays, as you put it, they are covering one of the facets, at least, of what he feels is important about this text. And this is the one he starts with, is the fact that this is like something that he's not laying claim to or authorship of. He's thinks it's extremely important that this is the first time in his mind in human history that we have something that's verifiable as discarnate intelligence communicating with us, that we have potential to prove via the text itself. And he feels that there's been a number of ways in which it's been proven already, and there's all kinds of stuff still packed into it that hasn't been brought out yet. I was looking at, because there's 5 of these little sections here, I was playing with this, with the idea that Crowley tends to think Kabbalistically, so like when he was dictating Magick in Theory and Practice, he claimed that he did so in 22 chapters, or 21 chapters plus chapter 0, mirroring the tarot, the trumps of the tarot, but he wasn't realizing that until later on, so that's his claim. So much was his brain kind of working in that kind of methodical Kabbalistic system. So I was thinking, I was kind of looking at each of these little groupings and thinking, well, do they relate to the rays of the law? So okay. Light, life, liberty, and love. So it's kind of playing with that a little bit. And it's probably, I don't know how accurate that ends up being, but we'll play with that maybe. And I was kind of thinking of this as being light, because it's something that's coming through from beyond just the human.
Yes, we've had this argument before, the question of whether light is primary or whether law is primary. And I was going to guess that you were going to say this chapter was the law, because it's entitled The Book, which later becomes the Book of the Law. And yeah, the it's tricky going by just
the titles themselves, because I mean there's a later one that's actually called The Law of Thelema, which is a little bit trickier to argue against. However, I was kind of categorizing that one as love, just because of the content of the chapter. So again, I'm not sure that it all lines up, but it might be a little bit of a conceit. It was obviously a bit of a conceit on my part to be projecting this onto the text. But
which points of the pentagram are they? The book could be spirit.
That would be my assumption.
It's just whether spirit is law or light that we will continue to argue about down into the ages.
One of the things about this text is he's saying that the language of most of the book is admirably simple, clear, and vigorous. No one can read it without being stricken in the very core of his being. Which is true. However, it is simple language, especially not many words that are, more than a couple or two or three syllables long in a lot of cases. But I remember giving a copy of this to somebody who couldn't make heads or tails out of it. And going back to the idea of introducing somebody to Thelema, giving them the Book of the Law is not helpful in elucidation.
I think I've had some times when it was really difficult for me to understand what was going on, just in terms of literacy, like picking this up and thinking that it was unlike anything else I'd ever read. And it takes a few goes to start figuring things out. Like even for a layperson, the idea that like Nuit and Hadith represent gods and that they're each dictating their separate chapters. I mean, Iowa's seems to be dictating the whole thing. So how are these spiritual beings then? So anyway, once you sort of decode the nuts and bolts of the text, then certain things become a little clearer, realizing that there are conversations going on in the holy books, even though there's no quotation marks and stuff. But I do think this is important. Thank you for noticing that paragraph. The language of the book is admirable, simple, clear, and vigorous. Admirably simple, clear, and vigorous. People will go on and on about the layers of metaphor and euphemism and, say that certain verses mean the opposite to what they seem to say. There are challenges in the book that people, I will give you of their blood to drink, for example, and let Mary inviolate be torn upon wheels. Is that right?
I think it's I will give you of their flesh to eat.
I will give you of their flesh to eat. And have nothing with the outcast and the unfit, let them die in their misery, this sort of thing. And that people really want to take it metaphorically and derive subtle spiritual lessons. Use the criticisms to self-interrogate and be discriminating with aspects of their psyche or consciousness, let's say. And I'm not saying that those layers don't exist, but here's the chief advocate for the text telling you that it's admirably simple, clear, and vigorous. And so I continue to hold a stick for the literal reading of many, many passages. Perhaps not those that encourage cannibalism. Again, to my lone person in a room who thinks we're figments of his imagination, please do not think that I'm telling you to eat people. But yeah, much of this I think also has, in addition to its metaphorical meaning, also has a literal meaning that you don't want to ignore.
And yeah, I think that's the most challenging thing about the book, is that it's not just challenging, but that you will, we will tend to kind of divert ourselves from that challenge and find ways to bypass and all that good fun. But it does take some familiarity to get to know, the basic plot of the book or the players and all that sort of thing. Personally, I find that any holy text kind of operates like a lens, and it's got a relationship with you in a big way, and you can use it. And it will grow with you. So, like in this case, I think that's the way I feel about the Book of the Law. That's the way I would feel about the Holy Bible. You can get a lot of the Holy Bible, which is anathema to a lot of Thelemites, but oh well. I think any holy text is potentially worthwhile in some respect.
Because these chapters are short, I usually go through and mark out quotations for us to read. And I've actually blocked out more than half of this in its entirety as stuff to read. And it's because there aren't threads of argument to pull, really, except for one clear, each chapter makes a series of clear statements that are sometimes statements unto themselves. Anyway, the second essay is called The Universe, and I will read it in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
This book explains the universe. The elements are Nuit, space, that is, the total possibilities of every kind, and Hadit, any point which has experience of these possibilities. This idea is for literary convenience symbolized by the Egyptian goddess Nuit, a woman bending over like the arc of the night sky. Hadit is symbolized as a winged globe at the heart of Nuit. I'm not sure Crowley understands what the word convenience means. For convenience, symbolized by the Egyptian goddess Nuit, a woman bending over like the arc of the night sky. So one of the struggles with this, again, the simpleness and vigorousness of this introduction, is that in some ways I already know what I want to say about all this stuff, and so it's hard for me to sort of read the text as it is and think about what Crowley's trying to say, because I have some screed that I usually go on here about, the Egyptian gods are, sorry, not the Egyptian gods, the Thelemic gods are natural principles, but in the Thelemic conception, natural principles actually are deities. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that...
Well, he'll get into the idea that, just coming up, he'll be talking about the fact that every man and every woman is a star. That is an aggregate of such experiences. So every event is a uniting of some one monad with one of the experiences possible to it. That was the line that's referring to. So, and I found it interesting rereading this portion for this, where he's saying every man and every woman is a star. That is an aggregate of such experiences, constantly changing with each fresh event which affects him or her either consciously or subconsciously. And I thought this was really interesting, especially because I've been brushing up on a lot of philosophical writings and stuff like that lately. So one of the things I was reading was Ire, which is language, truth, and logic, something like that. And it's that point in philosophy where, from an empiricist point of view, he's pointing out the fact that a lot of the metaphysical ideas that come into philosophy are actually just pretty much aberrations of logic, because it's a linguistic aberration that's going on. So the idea of using the word is can be problematic in creating a misinterpretation of a lot of the ways that we're using language and that sort of thing. And it really, between that and just listening to a lot of scientific, scientists and mathematicians speaking about science and physics and that sort of thing, it seems like very much the modern foregoing conception of the individual is as an aggregate of experiences, essentially, as opposed to, say, the old conception of a soul or a person as a monad in the sense of, that Atman or whatnot.
Another way to talk about this is to think about the individual as being a microcosm and the universe as being a macrocosm. Mm-hmm. Because, and Crowley will mention this explicitly in a couple more paragraphs, saying about each one of us has thus a universe of his own, but it is the same universe for each one as soon as it includes all possible experience. So for now, it does not include all possible experience, and you have contained within yourself the whole context of the universe that you understand. Mm-hmm. If you think about Jupiter, let's say that there's a real Jupiter that's out there that's part of our solar system. You may have some facts about Jupiter, and you can imagine, at least roughly speaking, not in any crystal clear way, but you can imagine light years, and you can believe that that's out there. But the only reason you can imagine those things is that they're represented in your consciousness somehow. Mm-hmm. Perhaps not as physical representations, but but you know they're out there by virtue of having internalized that knowledge.
Yeah, it's just a conception that you're holding at the moment.
So even though there is an objective universe, your universe lives inside your being. It's circumscribed by everything that is that you define as yourself.
Which is tricky territory, because this is where people tend to get off on that, tangent of like the idea that the universe is mental. That's one of those things that creeped into philosophy, and the idea that we create the universe by observing it, which is one of those sneaky quantum mechanical ideas that people like to run with and turn into something that's not. And this kind of thing where it's like the universe is just your mind, so it's all part of you and that sort of thing, which I think is one of those linguistic troubles that I was talking about.
This is something I was doing a lot of thinking about 5 years ago, but my favorite philosophy podcast that I mentioned on here before, The Partially Examined Life, was harping on this just 2 weeks ago. So lest I be accused of cribbing, I'll give credit where credit is due. And, every idealist philosopher has some explanation for object permanence. The world exists even when we're not looking at it. And so for Descartes, we get the world back when we realize that there is a God who could never possibly deceive us. Like, it's not an evil demon keeping us in a box. It really is God. And we know this because of some bizarre version of Anselm's ontological argument. And so once we have God, then the rest of existence comes back, even though he's imagining that maybe there's a sense experience beyond his, that he can distrust his sense experience. For Kant, there's these things in themselves which have the power to impress impressions upon us. And even though we don't know anything about the things in themselves, like our world is this world of ideas, there still is a real object that impresses itself upon us. And even for Berkeley, who's like the most idealist of all the idealists, who my thing of saying that like natural principles are deities, but natural deities are natural principles, but natural principles actually are deities. There's a way I heard talked about Berkeley saying that, like, yes, all objects are only ideas, but ideas actually are objects. And so he acknowledges that, like, even though the way we perceive objects is wrong, they're only ideas, they're only perceptions, there is no thing in itself. He gets object permanence by talking about the mind of God, so that when we're not looking, God, when we look away, God turns his attention and keeps the object where it is. So you don't get an explanation of magical principles just from the philosophy of idealism, because even though I think Kant's right that we live in this ideological world, there are still things in themselves that are remote to us, that we can't access, but they exist. They still exist, however you want to describe.
And thanks for bringing that up, the idea of the gods, because I mentioned that the individual is described here by Crowley as an aggregate of experiences, and so later on he'll talk about deities as like a larger scale aggregate in a similar kind of way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Gods are going to be weird ones because they will exist in our ideological world and have existence in the same way as anything else. This chair is a collection of ideas and perceptions and whatever, and the coffee is a collection of sense data and ideas, and so in the same way, things like gods are collections of sense experiences and ideas, but that don't seem to come from anywhere in the same way that we perceive objects in space. So gods in a way exist in the phenomenal world. And perhaps, and it's unclear whether they exist in the nominal world. So that is a weird one. But there's also this idea, this Deus ex homo thing, right? And so as we expand ever the domain of our consciousness and become larger and larger, and as Crowley says, eventually our universes become one universe as we become fully aware of the dimension of them, then we exist as we have the potential to exist as gods if we fully internalized, some agreed upon idea of what space is or something. This is not, I don't think, what he means when he says the above is an extremely crude attempt to explain the system which reconciles all existing schools of philosophy. He is pointing at Kant. He wants us to read Kant. He wants us to read the Prolegomena to any future metaphysics. But if you also look back at his, is it called A Little Note in Ontology? I always say little essay in ontology, but that's wrong. Bereshit, a note in ontology. He says that the three philosophies are a sort of monism, which is all is one, everything is made of God, and he sort of thinks that's a bit weird because it doesn't allow any room for anything else. So if you understand man as finite, then like if God's infinite and everything, no matter how big man is, he is nothing at all when expressed as a ratio. So if you're a monist, sort of your position is that you don't exist. And then there's a dualism, which I've talked about before as being like self, not self. And then sort of is for him, is it pluralism or nihilism next? It's some sort of nihilism, I think. But I think that somehow he thinks this Kantian idea of like an objective world that we have no access to, except that we're microcosms of our own universe, roughly speaking Kantian, not really, but is somehow a way of reconciling all those philosophies and putting a pin in it that works and that is coherent and useful. And he doesn't say much more about it, except that it's only crudely illustrated in this paper, so I don't feel equipped to say much more about it. Mm-hmm. But I think that's kind of what he's pointing at.
Yeah, he touches on that in the paper that you were alluding to, as well as in some of Magick Without Tears, in a couple of letters there, where he's talking about, I think, the different schools of magic, something along those lines. I think it's those ones. But yeah, moving on.
Why don't you read whatever it is you had marked out to read from the Law of Thelema?
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. This means that each of us stars is to move on our true orbit, as marked out by the nature of our position, the law of our growth, the impulse of our past experiences. All events are equally lawful, and every one necessary in the long run, for all of us, in theory. But in practice, only one act is lawful for each one of us at any given moment. Therefore, duty, with a capital D, consists in determining to experience the right event from one moment of consciousness to another. So this is, I think, as he's getting into this whole idea of like each action or motion is an act of love, the uniting with one or another part of Nuit. This is why I was kind of thinking, even though it's entitled The Law of Thelema, it was making me think of love instead.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think in terms of like which of the rays it is, I think love is good here. The first thing that occurs to me is I had sort of like an inexpressible frustration with Jack Parsons' conception of the two-edged sword. Mm-hmm. Like that, freedom for me has to mean freedom for everyone. And I thought that was a bit bland and a bit wrong for Thelema, a bit kind of what everybody on the internet sort of says now. And now we've sort of seen why here, because the two-edged sword really means that if you're free to do anything, if all of the world's possibilities are laid out before you and there's no external moral authority to tell you what to do, then the moral authority is, you doing the right thing. By yourself, for yourself, based on your understanding of your purpose and your actions and he calls it here, an orbit, what we think of as being true will in Thelema. The Book of the Law doesn't include that term, but so the two-edged sword is more like there's this ultimate freedom. No one's going to tell you what to do, therefore maybe you're paralyzed. The tyranny of too much choice or something like that. Like you have there is one right thing to do, and no one else is going to tell you what it is.
Yeah, and I like this being able to encapsulate that with the term duty. It makes me think of the old Latin term virtus, which did give rise to our present-day word virtue, but the term virtue is a corruption of what it used to mean in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, the word for man or hero was vir, and this is the word that gave rise to the word virtus, which was a sense of duty and that kind of honor and everything you can kind of imagine with the idea of living up to that image of the hero. I almost don't want to get into over defining it for myself, but point being, it wasn't the same thing as what became virtue and what we associate with that as a result of the past couple thousand years of Christianity and whatnot. So I feel like duty here, that's kind of the way Crowley's talking about it with regards to doing what thou wilt, finding out your true will, doing the right thing at the right time for your will.
And is that from the paper on duty where he says, discover your true will, do that and do nothing else?
Sounds about right. I meant to actually reread that paper, but I don't want to go off the top of my head and assume at the moment.
But there is somewhere in there the do that and do nothing else, and also in the Book of the Law, thou hast no right but to do thy will.
Do that, and no other shall say nay. And that's really the two-edged sword. That's like if you were just able, you can do whatever you want and fuck everyone else, forget about everybody else's opinion and all that sort of thing. Well, that's not giving you the whole story. There isn't anyone else.
Well, that's right, and often the way I'm characterizing this is often a bit wrong to say that no one's going to tell you what to do. The problem is everyone is going to try to tell you what to do, and freedom means having the courage to do the right thing in the face of bad advice.
Yeah, whatever that right thing is.
Whatever your right thing is. Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that it's not, well, I mean, I don't think that it's a blanket thing. You can start getting in your head what the right thing is at all moments. But I feel that in Thelema, we can see that the worldview for Thelema is that, well, morality is relative. The circumstances dictate the correct action.
And you had sort of maybe read this already, but I also had marked out here, each action or motion is an act of love, uniting with one or another part of Nuit. Each such action must be under will, chosen so as to fulfill and not to thwart the true nature of the being concerned. So the emphasis in moral conduct is to bring out the true nature of the being concerned.
Mm-hmm. The previous section, section 2, kind of laid out the environment that we were in. That was the section that I think I had listed down as, that was the universe. I had listed down as life. And sort of dealing with the basic philosophy of Thelema in terms of the environment that it's taking place in for the individual. And so this is next going to the practical aspect of things, and together they kind of allude to the idea of increasing the self to eventually become coterminous with the universe.
Do we make the, in terms of our points of the pentagram, do we make the universe water and the law of Thelema air? What do you think? Or is there some...
I'm going to withhold judgment at the moment.
Let's go to the fourth essay on the new Aeon. And I had at some point said that if we read this, then we can cut out a bunch of rambling stuff we'd said in previous chapters on the succession of the Aeons, the procession of the equinoxes or whatever. But maybe that's not quite right, because I think that what we talked about before still has value, and like everything here, this is sort of concise, if a bit long. The third chapter of the book is difficult to understand and may be very repugnant to many people born before the date of the book. It tells us the characteristics of the period on which we are now entered. Superficially, they appear appalling. We see some of them already with terrifying clarity. This is a cute idea, this idea that the Book of the Law will be difficult to understand and repugnant to people born before the date of its reception, except as if the date of its reception would be a hard line between old-thinking people and new-thinking people. And there's certainly been a lot of, shall we say, innovation in the field of ethics and in the last... 118 years, but yeah, I don't know whether it's a hard line drawn down April 8th, 1904.
Yeah, I might suggest that it's more like if there was a dong at that point in 1904, there's going to be kind of like your pendulum swinging back and forth as the mean itself is somewhere in the middle there, rather than at one of the extremes.
Yeah, the destruction of the world by fire, more like dong. I like your image of a vibrating bell, like a sine wave going out. Mm-hmm. And the sound waves move so quickly and so subtly, right? And they whoosh out and they swing back so that you don't usually even feel the movement of the air, but it is moving. It's vibrating and waving around you. And so for every push of energy, there's a retraction to the same degree, which is how we're able to hear things. Otherwise, it would just sound like wind.
And there's been constantly a reaction back and forth over the decades since, and there will continue to be so going into the future, I don't doubt.
The characteristics of the period on which we are now entered superficially appear appalling. I mean, I think people will say that all times appear appalling to those who are paying attention.
Yeah,
that's the declaration of the nihilistic age in which we reside. that it's always been all bad all over, and surely it has been for many people. But the period immediately following the reception of the Book of the Law is marked by the first two of what we call the world wars, the most among the most cataclysmic conflicts the world has ever been submerged into.
Not only that, but the nuclear capabilities that for the first time humanity was capable of wiping out all life on the planet.
Well, yeah, so it's bleaker than it was. Whatever you want to say, it's not just that the news is better. The news is far worse, and that's also a problem.
And this is where it gets into the but fear not. But then it explains that the book itself, I should say, explains that certain vast stars or aggregates of experience may be described as gods. This is where we get into that. One of these is in charge of the destinies of this planet for periods of 2,000 years. And this is indeed where we're getting into the idea of the Aeon proper, which I guess we can say is fundamental to Thelema. And I mean, it may seem obvious, but then again, it's probably worth addressing, because I think it's easy for people to start to argue against the idea of aeons because of the fact that it's like, well, you can see it as being something that was derived from J.G. Fraser, I believe, and I think did it come from other sources as well?
I'm not clear on this. I don't know if I've noticed it in the bits of the Fraser that I've read.
I know it was a popular idea at the time, at least. Anyway, mm-hmm. It was a popularly growing idea that there was a period of motherly goddess worship, followed by the past 2,500 years of father worship, and that we're now, the age of Aquarius and all that sort of thing, and the idea that there's, here we have in Thelema the idea of the Aeon of the child, of course. Whether that's a hard line, whether that actually all adds up, it's fundamental to Thelema. It's kind of hard to ignore.
Well, so if you're not going to do the Thelemic eschatology, and by eschatology I mean like this idea of the end of the world, what does the tracing the path of history, what does it look like? If you're not going to use this eschatology, if you think this sounds a little bit far-fetched, the question is, what concrete thing are you going to replace it with? Mm-hmm. Because if individuals have a work, a thing that they're sort of born to do, then that's kind of meaningless if all of history is kind of a directionless, meandering, mm-hmm. If you're born, if you exist for a reason and are working towards a goal, then surely there is some sort of cosmic goal. And I don't think it's obvious that civilization is progressing technologically, that civilization is progressing morally, that civilization is progressing, in terms of like greater happiness, greater status for people. There isn't, to me, an obvious linear like movement from backwardness to forwardness, mm-hmm. where everything's always just getting a little bit better for everyone, and weren't our ancestors silly, and now we're doing better. So these sort of cosmic, if you want to think of them as fairy tales, at least give a shape to a spiritual shape rather than a material shape to a thing to be doing with your life. This is why I think, like, in addition to this thing about aeons, reincarnation is also important, right? Because the work you're doing in your life, many people may not feel like they seem to have accomplished very much, mm-hmm. and especially like if all you've done is go into a monastery and and pray for a long time and then die, that's okay, but the work you're doing, you at least have to have the sense that it continues in order to motivate you to do it.
Mm-hmm. So. And I like in this case, I don't know if I'm coming off as being against the idea of aeons, but I think it's worthy of discussion. I will at times completely buy into it, but I will also completely question it, because that's just what I do. But here it's talking about the idea of the god of the Aeon, the particular Aeon involved, as itself a star, an aggregate of experience. So you could kind of think of that as like this greater form, with its constituent parts are all of humanity, or the greater societies within humanity and that sort of thing, contributing to this greater personification. It's kind of an interesting idea, and that could be, you could envision that as being this bubble of consciousness growing over time, and then as the wand is passed with the new Aeon, it takes on a new form.
I think you got as far as 2,000 years. It says so there are 2,000. Each of these gods rules of the planet for periods of 2,000 years. Here he says, in the history of the world, as far as we know accurately is an amusing thing to say. As far as we know accurately, there are 3 such gods. Isis the mother, when the universe was conceived as simple nourishment drawn directly from her, a period marked by matriarchal government. Next, beginning in 500 BC, Osiris the father, when the universe was imagined as catastrophic love, death, resurrection as a method by which experience was built up. This corresponds to the patriarchal system. Now Horus the child, in which we come to perceive events as a continual growth, partaking in its elements of both these methods, not to be overcome by circumstance. This present period involves the recognition of the individual as the unit of society. I don't know what a univisual is, but this is important. The present period involves the recognition of the individual as the unit of society. Mm-hmm. So this is interesting because I've parsed this in a number of different ways over the course of the way we've been talking, but here he says nourishment drawn directly from her, and then catastrophic love, death, resurrection, and then partaking of the elements of both of these methods, but not to be overcome by circumstance. So a certain vigorousness, still understanding the tragedy of catastrophic love, death, and resurrection, while also drawing nourishment directly from spirit, and with the added element of not being overcome by circumstance, of being vigorous and making our choices in the face of anything, and sort of well, the way it's put in the book is conquering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the portion that I had labeled law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think probably partially just for the difficulty of putting everything in a place, but I also labeled it as whereas we had the first chapter was discarnate intelligence, and the second was philosophy, setting up the philosophy. The third chapter was the practical aspects of the work involved, and then this would be teleology. It's the idea of seeing things in terms of historical development and that sort of thing, as you were sort of touching on earlier. So yeah, regardless of whether there is some grand goal that we're working towards, whether it's the end of the world or it's the beginning of some great paradise in the future or something like that, we are developing.
Yeah, I should say that at least in my conception, we're post-apocalyptic. We're not an apocalyptic cult, but Crowley calls the reception of the Book of the Law, this event that's being described here, the destruction of the world by fire.
Yes.
So as far as I'm concerned, we've already had one apocalypse in 1904, and we can't expect another one for, he says, 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So this is not a prepper cult. The work we're doing in terms of
cult.
we're post-prepper. Perfect.
I find it interesting because in the John D manuscripts, there's the angels talk about the fact that at that time they say that this is the end of our time, and there will be a new time to come. And there's a lot of little places in the D manuscripts where the angels seem to be alluding to. It lines up with Thelema, pretty strongly, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so our work in the world is not to sell out all of our properties and dig a big hole and try to live in it, for the sake of propagation of the species or whatever through, or to try to get raptured. Our true will is necessarily post-prep. as you've said. So whatever it is, it's going to be about setting the stage for the next 2,000-year period, not about spiritually enduring the end of the previous 2,000-year period. Hopefully, atom bombs notwithstanding. This is a little bit of political commentary, and I don't necessarily want to make too much of it, but I think it's worth reading. People run away from this scary stuff, so let's not do that. Observe for yourselves the decay of the sense of sin, the growth of innocence and irresponsibility, the strange modifications of the reproductive instinct with a tendency to become bisexual or epicene, the childlike confidence in progress combined with the nightmare fear of catastrophe against which we are yet half unwilling to take precautions.
That's only truer today than it ever was then.
Consider the outcrop of dictatorships only possible when moral growth is in its earliest stages, and the prevalence of infantile cults like communism, fascism, pacifism, health crazes, occultism in nearly all its forms, religions sentimentalized to the point of practical extinction. Consider the popularity of the cinema, the wireless, the football pools, guessing competitions, all devices for soothing fractious infants, no seed of purpose in them. Consider sport, the babyish enthusiasms and rages which it excites, whole nations disturbed by disputes between boys. Consider war, the atrocities which occur daily and leave us unmoved and hardly worried. We are children. And this...
Children of light,
holy
we are
smokes.
shining.
The only little point of apologia I want to offer here for this. So if we're so fond of making ad hominem attacks against Crowley, he was a Satanist, his insights can't possibly be insightful. I will also, by virtue of the same ad hominem reasoning, say he couldn't possibly be homophobic because he was a bisexual. So other than that, I'm gonna let this stand and the people can eat it, because holy smokes, is it incisive.
Yeah, I would say I would just like to ferret out one little point, which is that he's also calling out. This all sounds a little bit like he's saying these are. In some of these things, like consider the outcrop of dictatorships only possible, yada, 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 fascism, pacifism, health crazes, all these things. It sounds a little bit derogatory in many places, but it's just he's pointing out the fact of how this all alludes to this childish nature that we have, and there's nothing wrong with this childish nature. It is our nature right now that he's getting at.
I think... I would tend to see it as a little bit more problematic than that. I think it is intentionally condescending, and I think if it hurts people, that's okay. Yeah, because
but actually, what I was going to get at, sorry to cut you off there, is I didn't mean to. That wasn't actually the point I was getting at. I wanted to ferret out the occultism.
Yeah,
in nearly all its forms.
Nearly all its forms, except this. Except
for this form. But just give it a few decades, and we'll make this kind of
Bathurst
iffy
was
as well.
a fraud. You got to send me a couple $1 though. I got my new Equinox coming. Yeah. So yes, there's nothing inherently wrong with childishness. Not only is it our destiny in the Aeon of the Child to embody childishness, but we're also early in the Aeon, so that is why this childishness is coming out. But also, it just is childishness.
Yeah, it's why it's coming out in unproductive ways, or ways that are kind of trying to stumble out blindly and try things and that sort of thing.
Crowley often extols the virtues of manhood, which are and when he's talking about this manly thing, or this is manly, and this thing, this great manly thing, he means in part, I think, not childish. One can't be manly if one is childish, and so there are sincere complaints here. but there's also an acknowledgement of the facts of the case at hand.
Well, he in a few places also talks about the fact that he recognizes that he was born before the Aeon, so he's still a child of the old Aeon himself, and recognizes the fact that he has difficulty completely understanding everything about the new Aeon. He recognizes his own shortcomings in that respect, and I think we can still. I certainly recognize that for myself, like the fact that, as time goes on and we see new generations born and growing up and whatnot, it's easy to get into that old man kind of mentality of like, these kids today and all that sort of thing. And it's like, no, they're, that's whatever's going forward is nothing to do with what we want. It's nothing to do with what we think is correct and all that sort of thing. It is what it is.
Yeah. Except I think sometimes Crowley thought of Thelema as being like the antidote to some of this stuff. Communism, fascism, pacifism, health crazes, and in the Jack Parsons we read talking about how good old fashioned liberalism is going to be the solution for people accusing each other of being communists and fascists when they're all really just totalitarians. There is a core virtue here that even if we're cranky old men, we still have to believe in this core virtue of, liberté, égalité, fraternité, or whatever. That if we believe people should be free, watching children try to censor each other isn't like, it's not our world anymore. It's like, I think we're allowed to think that's bad.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and I think in this case, actually, to your point, I was about to ask. Okay, well, this is true. What is Crowley's recommendation of how Thelema is going to help? He does end every one of these little chapters with some spin on the idea of under the enlightened guidance of the Master Therian.
He wants you to send him an email.
Yeah. So he wants to point out that he is the world teacher here.
If you ask a question, he will answer you. You might not like the answer, but he's available to take questions.
And people can criticize this as being like a complete egocentrism, which is fine. But the point here is that he is saying Thelema is the way of the future, and he is saying that he is the Master Therian, or at least representative of the forces working through into this Aeon and that sort of thing, and making reference to his writings and teachings and whatnot is a good idea, and I would buy into that. And I'd say that the reason I'd buy into that is because otherwise, how is Thelema really driving forward the Aeon through the Book of the Law and all that sort of thing?
There needs to be some grounds upon which it stands. Otherwise, it isn't anything. And if everybody can interpret, the book, like you were saying earlier, like if people can take the Book of the Law itself and just cut out Crowley altogether, then they can interpret those lines, put their own spin on it and that sort of thing, and not deal with it in the way that they don't want to deal with it. Yeah.
And so it's nice to have Crowley's writings to force us to look at it and keep some kind of focus, because otherwise it can evolve into something it's not, like everything always does.
Well, without Crowley's layer of interpretation, passages become more upsetting, not less. The explanation of what it means to peck out the eyes of Jesus as he hung upon the cross, or to flap the wings in the face of Muhammad, or the cannibalism bits and stuff like this. If you read the new comment, Crowley has ideas about that are extremely helpful. And if you just want to throw out Crowley for ad hominem reasons, he's if you read the Kenneth Grant diaries, the from the Kefaloon period where him and Layla are taking all the cocaine and doing the sadomasochism stuff, like there's really kind of upsetting little single paragraphs in there that are worth getting upset about. But it doesn't mean he's an idiot. And it doesn't mean you can throw at everything he says about the thing he invented that you claim to be interested in.
But there was that time he tweeted that thing, and
that's right.
Somebody dug it up.
When there's real stuff to be mad at, people get hung up on trivialities. So you need Crowley as an interpreter. You can't because otherwise you have no way to approach the Book of the Law except your own, just like guessing. Mm-hmm. He wants you to apply to him as a teacher, and if that's egocentric, that's fine. Like, if
egos come with Thelema. So
if I invented something and someone else wanted to know how to do it, and I was the only one in the world who knew how to do it, I would invite them to take classes with me. He also, was, I think if you read his magical records, it's clear that he's probably the highest attained master of his time, probably in the entire world, and the greatest English language writer on yoga even till today. Yes, send him an email. Chapter 5, The Next Step.
This I had under liberty as my
cool.
guesstimations, and my secondary word to go with it was just political, because he's getting into a little bit of the politics, and leaving us with the development of things. Incidentally, as far as the teleological thing went in the previous chapter, he mentioned how this new Aeon of Horus will develop, how the child will grow up. These are for us to determine, growing up ourselves in the way of the law of Thelema, under the enlightened guidance of the Master Therion. So whether or not there is an eschatology going on, there's certainly a process that we are undergoing by knowing and doing our true will.
Yeah, if it's easier for you to think of it as a tautology, that's fine. But yeah, there is something goal-oriented about it.
Mm-hmm. You want to just read this whole one, since
why
it's
not?
Short? Do you want me to read it this time?
Go ahead.
Democracy daughters, ferocious fascism, cackling communism, equally frauds, cavort crazily all over the globe. They are hemming us in. This immediately made me think of Jack Parsons, and I could just see him, getting off on this.
See him alone in a one-bedroom apartment with the CIA putting explosives under his kitchen stove.
They are abortive births of the child, the new Aeon of Horus. Liberty stirs once more in the womb of time. Evolution makes its changes by anti-socialistic ways. The abnormal man, who foresees the trend of the times and adapts circumstances intelligently, is laughed at, persecuted, often destroyed by the herd. But he and his heirs, when the crisis comes, are the survivors. I feel it necessary to kind of stop here and there, because there's a lot going on here. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. In this case, it's emphasizing... I think I had in my head that he brought up the whole lone wolf idea that comes up. I thought he had mentioned that in this until rereading it recently, so I guess I was wrong, but this is where he gets closest to it.
Is the stuff on the lone wolf in the herd, was that in Liber 150?
Could be.
And yeah, it doesn't say the Book of the Law announces a new dichotomy. Is that Liber 152? Because I was imagining that we would get to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that stuff is. I can't think of it offhand.
Huh, okay.
But in this case, we have, an emphasis on the abnormal, quote-unquote, man, who foresees the trend of the times. And which is essentially the function of a lesser prophet of some sort. And a prophet doesn't have to be, the generically thought of psychic person, or a person who's necessarily directly in communication with God, although that helps. It could simply be somebody who's capable of looking at the past, looking deeply at the present, and being able to make an intelligent guess about the future.
The word evolution in occultism is used in kind of a weird way. It's not quite the like social evolution thing that was popular in the early 20th century that got a lot of people in a lot of trouble. Social Darwinism. It's not quite that, but it's also not quite random mutation, sexual selection either. We talk about evolution as being like something a person can accomplish in one lifetime. That's more like metamorphosis or something, like a caterpillar into a butterfly. But also by doing metamorphosis, you do something for the course of history as well. Like your personal evolution guides the hand of societal evolution, and there is, whereas in both social Darwinism and like actual Darwinism, there's a sense of randomness. In occultism, when we use that term, we do think of a sort of tautology, of this sort of like progressing, not just changing. And so evolution makes its changes by anti-socialistic ways. I think what you can think about here is like Galileo or Copernicus being under house arrest for knowing something about the solar system, being correct when everyone else is wrong. Mm-hmm. That he's endorsing the courage of your convictions, whatever they are. And you might be wrong, but maybe everyone else is wrong, and like there's no way to know. You're the only one who can evaluate your own understanding, and you should try to do that. Like you should read, and you should research, and you should meditate, and you should do all of the things that help you know whether or not you're wrong. But you shouldn't just allow yourself to be steamrolled by some external authority. Because it's possible that everyone else is wrong, mm-hmm. and if you give up, then no one else has any hope of progress, because it's individuals that push.
Mm-hmm. And this chapter is very much the individual versus the herd. So this is why I was thinking, I guess, of that lone wolf kind of idea. Above us today hangs a danger never yet paralleled in history. We suppress the individual in more and more ways. We think in terms of the herd. War no longer kills soldiers, it kills all indiscriminately. Every new measure of the most democratic and autocratic governments is communistic in essence. It is always restriction. We are all treated as imbecile children. DORA, the Shops Act, the motoring laws, Sunday suffocation, the censorship. They won't trust us to cross the roads at will.
I love this.
Mm. Fascism is like communism, and dishonest into the bargain. The dictators suppress all art, literature, theater, music, news. That does not meet their requirements. All of that stuff that does not meet their requirements. Yet the world only moves by the light of genius. The herd will be destroyed in mass. And he mentions the genius. This is an important point, too. This something that really interests me about Crowley's thought, which I think should get a lot of emphasis, is his conception of genius and expression of genius, basically honing in on genius, finding ways of allowing genius to flow and that sort of thing. And it seems like he's suggesting that it is a function of the individual, not of the herd.
Genius is something that individuals receive and commune with. It's not, we don't mean in occultism, and Crowley doesn't usually mean, man, that guy's a genius, like just because he's cleverer than everyone else. A genius is is a spirit that can motivate people, can motivate action, can give inspiration.
Yeah, it's something that flows through you. He has a really beautiful little passage in Moonchild, his novel, where Simon If is speaking to, I think it's Lavinia King, but it's a female character, and he's expounding his philosophy to some extent, but he's describing a typist. It's like as if the individual is a typist, and the holy guardian angel, I guess you can conceive it as, or the genius. I'll just refer to it as the genius so that I cut out the whole question of the HGA and that whole kettle of fish. The genius is operating through the typist, and the typist can master their art in order to better allow the flow of that genius.
Evolution makes its change by anti-socialistic ways. The world only moves by the light of genius. These two bits go together well in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? Anti-socialistic ways also makes me think that I feel like there's something really in madness, in the sense of chaos, something to break down order and that sort of thing. And there's something really needed there. I mean, we could go into the whole idea of like the shaman who's like the outsider from society who breaks down the order in some way and can throw a wrench into the works and that sort of thing. But I feel like that's an important aspect to magic.
That's what people are really afraid of. Crowley worked with demons. It was so dark. Some of the stuff is very misogynist, and some of the stuff is very racist. And like, I know that it's not core teachings, it's just diary entries or like venting frustrations, but like it's in there and it bothers me. Or like people have said to me before that Thelema is too masculine because it involves reading, like as if women can't read, which is insane. Mm-hmm. But that it's too academic and too masculine. It's all an excuse. The real thing people are afraid of is just the label on the tin. This is the philosophy of free will, which means people are free. They do what they need to do. They connect with their true will. They express their genius. And the justifiable fear is that sometimes that's dangerous. Sometimes people are inspired to do dangerous, monstrous, scary things, and that Thelema includes the possibility of madness. And so people are scared of Thelema for the same reason they're scared of everything else. All these endless restrictions Crowley's talking about mm-hmm. are what if something goes wrong? Something's gonna go wrong. Get over it.
Yeah.
But that's when anything anyone says about Thelema from a critical bent, all they're saying is I'm scared.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Not just the idea of like censorship and the things he's talking about, but also just the herd in general. The whole idea of the herd is that it's safety.
Yeah.
As Nietzsche talked about. It's safety in the herd. And I mean, there's a necessity to the herd in a sense because it's this is society we're talking about here, but it's like the safety factor needs to be broken up. This is fundamental to society being able to survive.
I stumbled across something by just like a Facebook meme that was attributed to Simone de Beauvoir. And it does. I don't know if it's her, but it sounds like something she would say. That the oppressors would not be so powerful if they did not have so many allies among the oppressed. Mm-hmm. So people are not only afraid that of the freedom of other people, but they're afraid of what they would do if they had their own freedom. Mm-hmm. Simone de Beauvoir's criticism, part of Simone de Beauvoir's criticism, is that women are scared of feminism because they're so used to being decorations. Mm-hmm. It's nice to have a comfortable home, and it's nice to have a husband who takes care of you. And if that means you can't vote, then that's too bad. But like, taking care of myself when I've been infantilized my whole life is a scary prospect.
Yeah.
And so she's worried about people who are going to be anti-feminist just because they're scared of what liberty might look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Thelema faces the same problem.
Yeah, and taking a different slant on it, the idea of being in an abusive relationship, people, it's easy to say, well, why don't you get out of it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a scary place to be in because you're afraid that trying to get out of it is going to be a greater threat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, of course you would, but it's like that's a scary place to be in. I mean, when we're talking about the herd, generally we're thinking in terms of just the docility of the herd and the being placated, getting all your commodities, having like all these comforts and things, and just being lulled into a sort of stupefaction and being able to be happy with your lot in life. That's being in the herd, and it's seductive. Because it's safe. Thank you and good night. Sorry. I guess we can finish this one off. The establishment of the law of Thelema is the only way to preserve individual liberty and to assure the future of the race. In the words of the famous paradox of the Comte de Phoenix, however you pronounce that in French, the absolute rule of the state shall be a function of the absolute liberty of each individual will. All men and women are invited to cooperate with the Master Therion in this, the great work. Now, is the law of Thelema the only way to preserve individual liberty and to assure the future of the human race?
What else you got? I mean, I think the problem is he doesn't see a lot of alternatives. There's these mass movements that he's identifying, that I've called in the past, just like thinking of as being like modern partisanship, right? Like in Canada, we have all these political parties, like 5 or something. But you either vote liberal or conservative, and if you care enough to vote green, then you're still getting behind someone else. You're not having your own opinions. Crowley says, I've never in my life disgraced myself by voting. And these mass movements that try to save people by having a clear platform and a doctorate and an organized, a very clear, complete program, And I think Crowley thinks, however virtuous the program is, the fact that it's clear and complete is problematic because what you're hoping is that everyone is going to line up and cooperate.
It's a form of restriction, ultimately.
Whereas if there's another way to save the world from these problems, Thelema is the best way to get at it because it gives the maximum number of people the maximum amount of freedom to do creative work.
I think this is very true. I think it's easy to... I mean, the first go-to place tends to be to think of the overarching sort of ordeal. So like you say, it's like the political parties. It's the idea of seeing it from, is communism a good idea? Is fascism a good idea? Is democracy a good idea? Seeing things from this level. But by taking it always back to the individual at this time and just concentrating on this individual as the fundamental starting point, that seems really important. Every time I start thinking about... Well, anytime I think about politics, my mind always goes back to education and the way that we're, supporting and facilitating people as they are growing into the world becomes, to me, the backbone of things. And the best way to facilitate them is to empower them. And what better way to empower the individual than some of the teachings of Thelema, really, when it comes down to it, and the lessons of Thelema.
Be honest with me. If someone had never heard of Thelema before and listened to this 2 hours of us talking about this, do you think they'd be any closer to the mark?
Good question. That's a tough call because, the unfortunate thing is that we have a nasty habit of assuming everybody, doing kind of what Crowley often did, was just assume everybody already knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, but we read a good chunk of this, right? And so does it function as the introduction it's obviously designed to be? I've been calling this the preface. It's literally called the introduction. You think if you didn't know, if you weren't already on board, do you think you'd be more curious now than you were before? Or
it would be interesting to hear. I don't want to assume so, but I would like to think so. I think this is Crowley I'm surprised at how concise he is here, because he's not generally this concise. And he's really restrained himself, at least that's the impression I get. And he's managed to get everything in a nutshell. It's the philosophy, the basic mythology, if you want to call it that. The idea that this is that might be a dangerous term, I guess. I don't know if that can, the term mythology is a little bit, loaded, I suppose.
I always say doctrine. I don't know why I said mythology. I think just because you were wondering if people would be weird about the Aeons, like think they were too spooky or too made up or something.
Well,
I was allowing for the idea that it might be a mythology, but that's not the word I would use either.
I don't know if it's a terrible word at the same time. Like, I think there was some place where Crowley was like in a letter to somebody who was saying that you should emphasize the mythology of the reception of the law, the Book of the Law, and I think the idea being a recognition of the fact that inevitably it becomes a mythology, and that this is just a psychological fact. All of these things blow up over the years, and this is why we have this image of Crowley as the image that we carry around. None of us actually knew Crowley. We just have an image that we carry around, So same thing with the reception of the Book of the Law. That's something that he thought was worth popularizing. And so the idea of I was delivering the Book of the Law, speaking on behalf of Hurparkrat and each of the Thelemic deities in turn. It's not wrong to call it a mythology. It's just wrong to say that means it's fiction. And I think mythology tends to equate to fiction in our modern conception. Thank you and good night. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Darren. This was great as always. I appreciate it. Let's try to hit it again in about 3 weeks.
Sounds great.
All right, 93.
93. Thank you for joining us. Look for Toronto Thelema on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Watch for events in the city. And join us again in the darkly splendid abodes. I can't believe how much time I get on these SD cards. I have not erased anything since I started doing these. And it still has, according to this, 160 hours.
Hours?
Which I assume is relative.
We're so old.
Yeah. Wow! What's this button do? It's caps lock.
I remember when those tapes only had about 15 minutes.
Back in my day, you used to have to cut the grooves in yourself.
A long play record had 4 songs on one side, and then if you only had 3 songs, you just had to leave a gap on the other side.
You used to have this little red doohickey that you'd put on the record because it was a 45, and okay, anyway. So
God damn it.